Minister, the Education Minister and indeed the current government had promised Irish schools, both primary and post-primary, of ongoing funding for ICT budgets until 2027, when it would then be reviewed. And this budget is calculated on the type of school and the school roll numbers, and the funding was to come out of a €200 million package announced by the government to be given in the schools in the time period from 2022 to 2027 as part of Ireland's National Development Plan. Now, without consultation, the ICT budget for schools seems to have disappeared and has not been allocated to schools for the 2022-2023 school year. According to a recent PQ I submitted on this issue, the reply stated that it is hoped to issue the next tranche of funding in the 2023-2024 school year, no later than January of 2024. It also states in the reply that, as with all funding, the issuing of the grant is subject to the availability of exchequer funding and the wider capital needs of the department. There's no mention in the reply of what happened to funding for 2022 and 2023, and there's also no definite commitment for subsequent years, as promised, up until 2027. It's dependent on exchequer funding. So a number of schools who thought this budget would be ongoing have signed up to and outsourced ongoing tech support packages, which they now have to find funding for from alternative avenues. They presumed this funding would be available each year for the 5 school years because that is what the initial announcement indicated. Schools planned their expenditure based on that assumption. And as technology changes so frequently, many schools decided to lease the necessary equipment and have entered into contracts for the duration of the lease for ongoing support and upgrades. So from 2018, schools have been required to develop or update their digital strategies in line with the digital learning framework for schools, and within the framework it states that there is a whole school approach and commitment to the effective and highly effective use of digital technologies in teaching and learning. Indeed, the opening paragraph from the Minister of Education in relation to the digital strategy states it envisages a future where every learner will have ample opportunity to benefit from technology in their learning and will develop key skills for the digital world. In 2023, the department launched the new primary curriculum framework, and within that framework, schools are expected to implement being a digital learner as one of a number of key competencies, and the STEM curriculum area includes digital technology. So I can't see how any of the above is possible without the promised ICT budget. The circular in relation to digital strategy, it's Circular 0027/20/22, a quote from it: "The features of the ICT grant scheme was to have a 5-year approach based on €200 million committed under the National Development Plan over the period of the strategy. This approach facilitates multi-annual planning by schools. The digital learning plan should be reviewed and updated at least annually and used to guide the expenditure of this grant funding to embed digital technologies in a phased and coherent approach to improve learning outcomes." I know this issue has been raised by a number of other deputies, including Sinn Féin spokesperson for Education, Sorcha Clark, and the Minister indicated in a response to one of those deputies that the provision of digital technologies in schools, including leasing arrangements, are a matter for the Board of Management. I feel that response is disingenuous. The Board of Management in a school, and indeed with the principal and the staff, presumed that the funding promised under the digital strategy would be forthcoming for the next 5 years and that it would be allocated in each of the years. So, Minister, can you address the issue of funding for the school year just completed, year 2022-2023? Will this money be made available retrospectively to cover costs that schools have actually expended already on the expectation that the grant was going to be paid?
Under the digital strategy for schools of 2015 to 2020, overall investment of €210 million issued to all schools, to all recognised primary and post-primary schools in annual grant funding. This funding has supported schools to invest in appropriate digital infrastructure and to embed the use of digital technology in teaching, learning and assessment. The new digital strategy for schools to 2027 was published last year and is underpinned by an investment of €200 million to support schools over the period committed to under Ireland's National Development Plan. The first tranche of €50 million in grant funding issued to all recognised primary and post-primary schools in late 2021. In addition to this, as part of Ireland's National Recovery and Resilience Plan, under the Next Generation EU funding facility, the Department issued a grant of €50 million in December 2021 to recognise primary and post-primary schools in the free education scheme in order to support those learners at the risk of education disadvantage through digital divide, a total of €100 million. The digital strategy for schools was developed following an extensive consultation process with all relevant stakeholders and is focused around 3 pillars. It aims to ensure that the school system is prepared for and continues to progress the embedding of digital technologies in teaching, learning and assessment. It intends to embed further progress of the potential of digital technologies to transform the learning experiences of students, and it aims to help students to develop key digital skills to facilitate their participation in society and the economy as they transition to further and higher education and to the world of work. The timing of the issue of the grant is subject to the wider capital needs of the school system. It is anticipated that the next tranche of funding in the 2023-24 school year. As underpinned by the digital strategy for schools to 2027, the Department remains fully committed to ICT in schools and has to date invested over €300 million directly to schools for ICT over the last 6 years. It is anticipated that the funding committed to under the NDP will be available to support the implementation of the digital strategy to schools in future years. As with funding under the previous strategy, the funding under the digital strategy for schools 2027 is issued directly to schools as they are best placed to identify the requirements of their own student cohort and to meet those requirements in the most appropriate way in accordance with their digital learning plan. Thank you, Lesko.
Thank you, Minister. But what you've told me there doesn't actually answer the question about the 2022-2023 school year and the fact that some schools have committed funding that they expected to get from this grant, because the Financial Support Services Unit produced a grant schedule for the 2022-2023 academic year, and the ICT grant was listed as part of that. And schools expected that money to maybe come through in December of 2022, as it had in December of 2021. But next thing, it was moved on the schedule, and next thing, it disappeared off the schedule. And schools are left scratching their heads as to what happened here. I mean, part of the digital strategy actually states that schools will need ongoing funding on a multi-annual basis and certainty as to the frequency of payments and amounts involved to provide for infrastructure replacement and upgrade, investment in emerging technologies as appropriate and maintenance support. So it's stated in the digital strategy itself that this should be multi-annual, but it also that schools need certainty, and they need certainty on the frequency of the payment and the amount of payment, and that wasn't given to them. And even, as I said, in the PQ response that I got, it's just hoped that the next tranche will be paid this year. You know, that's not really strong enough for schools now, and they're left wondering and scratching their heads, how are they going to come up with the funding to cover the investment that they've already made in information technology for the schools. As I said, they've engaged some of them in contracts to have the equipment leased to keep themselves updated with new emerging technologies and to get upgrades and support. And I suppose the fact that it's anticipated that funding committed to under the National Development Plan will be available, it's anticipated or it's hoped. I don't think that's strong enough. Schools need absolute reassurance that this money will be paid to them on a yearly basis to cover the costs of technology, and they're already down 1 year. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. As previously stated, I expect that the next tranche of funding under digital strategy will issue in the coming school year by January 24. The ongoing commitment to embedding the use of digital technology in teaching and learning is demonstrated through the continued investment in teacher professional learning, relevant resources and the schools programme, with policy articulated in the digital strategy for schools to 27. Our overall school building programme is demand-driven and determined by our legal obligations to ensure provision for education. The Department continues to engage with the Department of Public Expenditure and NDP delivery and reform as part of the overall review of the NDP that has been undertaken later in 23 for the period of 20 to 2028, with a view to ensuring as smooth as possible rollout of the NDP priorities, including digital strategy commitments into the future. ICT grant funding for schools is part of the capital budget of the Department and Government, and as such is subject to the availability of exchequer funding as well as the wider capital needs of the school system. And as highlighted, €50 million grant funding did issue to recognise primary and post-primary schools in late 2021, and an additional €15 million in December 2021 to recognise primary and post-primary schools in the free education system in order to support those learners at risk of educational disadvantage through digital divide. That was quite a substantial funding, Deputy. Thank you.